Okay, well, welcome everyone to our first CTNS Zoom public forum. It's really exciting. We're launching a new program, and thanks so much for joining us for this one. We've heard from a lot of you that it's the first time you've been able to participate because you're at a distance, or we're at a distance, more than 6 feet. And that's great. We're going to keep it up during the year, keep you posted on upcoming events. So I'm Bob Russell, the founder and director of the Center for Theology and Natural Sciences, CTNS. And our mission is to promote the creative mutual interaction between theology and science through research, teaching, and public service. And the forum series is really a central part of our public service, bringing our work and conversations to a much, much wider and now national and even international audience. So this is very exciting for us. We are about to celebrate next year our 40th anniversary, founded in 1981. Got to think back, was there in 1981? And we're also celebrating, we will celebrate our 5th anniversary of being an internal program of the GTU. So this is an exciting year of pre-anniversaries and events to really look forward to. And as you know, the GTU we are an interdisciplinary program between theology and science. The GTU is an ecumenical consortium and a multi-faith doctoral program in celebrating its 60th anniversary. So lots to celebrate this year. And we're delighted with the fact that we can work together. So thank you. Before I introduce our speaker for tonight, I want to thank Melissa for organizing the Zoom invitations and Braden for hosting the talk and helping me fine-tune my incredibly poor Zoom skills. But fortunately, my students may suffer them, but you'll be spared. So tonight's talk is given by Noreen Herzfeld. Noreen is the Nicholas and Bernice Reuter Professor of Science and Religion at St. John's University and the College of St. Benedict. She holds degrees in computer science and mathematics from Pennsylvania State University and a Ph.D. in theology from the GTU, where Ted and I were on a committee. Noreen, was that around 2000? When did you graduate?
2000, you got it right.
2000, because
And Arthur was on my committee.
That's right.
Also, and so was Mitch Marcus. We've got almost all the committee here.
Mitch is here. Welcome, Mitch. Yeah, that's great, because you published your book from your dissertation in our image in 2001, in 2. So that's fantastic. Okay, thank you for being here tonight. And the title of your talk is Surrogate, Partner, or Tool, How Autonomous Should Technology Be? So Noreen, take it away.
Thank you, Bob. And thanks to all of you for showing up this evening. I wish that we could be together in person. I would just love to be near you all, but I also know that you're not all in one spot, and neither am I here in Minnesota. So at least we can gather this way. Yeah, my talk is based on a chapter that I've written for an upcoming book called The Robot Will See You Now, and I was assigned the job of discussing technology. So my talk will start by talking about technology in general and some religious perspectives on technology in general, and then it will move to speak more specifically about artificial intelligence and particularly about lethal autonomous weapons. But I want to start, since, you know, it really is affecting all of our lives, with COVID-2. And, you know, we have had an urgent need for therapeutics, for testing, ultimately for a vaccine against COVID-2. And scientists have called on every tool in their toolbox, including a wide variety of artificial intelligence programs. Just a few things off the top. A first line of defense was to use machine learning to test over 6,000 existing drugs that had already been through clinical trials to see if any of them could be repurposed to combat COVID-2. Google's DeepMind team has started a project to train a neural network to predict the protein structures that are associated with the virus, and that's as part of developing a vaccine. And in the meantime, robots have stepped in across the United States, Europe, and Asia to take over factory jobs, to fill delivery orders while we're all ordering from Amazon and other online places, to disinfect hospital rooms and bring food to the quarantined. So technology is our friend, or so it seems. We have always been creators of technology. I mean, ever since, early men started hurling a stone to provide lunch and then maybe rubbing two sticks together to cook that lunch, that was technology. Technology gives us great power and advantage, and it changes our world. This is wonderful when we're fighting something like COVID-19. But technologies also bring about changes we didn't foresee, and especially those of you in California are certainly feeling that right now with the difficulties that climate change is bringing and all of these fires. So you can see that technology is for us two-sided. It brings great benefit, and it also can often be seen in retrospect that it also brought great harm. So technology is not a neutral force. The French philosopher Jacques Ellul says, "It is a power endowed with its own peculiar force. It refracts in its own specific sense the wills which make use of it and the ends proposed for it." And I think this quotation of Ellul raises our basic question, which is, how autonomous should technology be? Should technologies simply reflect and refract our purposes, amplifying our own natural abilities? Or should technologies eventually be able to have a power or purpose of their own? A lot of technologies, when we think about them, are simply amplifications. The hammer amplifies the force of our arm. A telescope, amplifies our eye, lets us see things at a distance that we generally couldn't see. Computers and artificial intelligence amplify our mind. They manipulate vast amounts of data at incredible speeds. And in extending the human mind, AI seems to be, of all our tools, that which is most likely to cross the barrier from the realm of amplification to the realm of autonomy. So how can we best harness it so that it reflects and refracts our purposes, as Ellul said, serves us rather than are ultimately serving it? So I want to start first with a brief section. What is technology? Okay, technology has one purpose: to alter our condition or our environment. Through various technologies, we've tamed the elements, disease, predators. We've made our lives longer and a whole lot more comfortable. The word technology comes from the Greek word techne, which means craft, art, or knowledge. So while we often tend to think of technology in terms of our tools or our machines, the actual term goes much further. It embraces how we use those tools, how we craft those tools, what knowledge we bring to those tools, or what knowledge those tools bring to us. So technology embodies not just machines, but our techniques, our processes, and our goals. It changes those techniques, processes, and goals, and in that way, it comes to define a large part of the societies that use a particular technology. Now, while Greek techne and modern technology seem much the same, they're not exactly the same. The social critic Neil Postman noted that here in the West, and I'm going to quote him here, the deification of technology, which means that the culture seeks its authorization in technology, finds its satisfactions in technology, and takes its orders from technology, has taken root. Think of that for a minute. According to Postman, we deify technology because we seek authorization from it, we find our satisfaction in it, we take orders from it. Okay, the tools of the Greek techne solved pressing physical problems in the production of food, clothing, and shelter. They aided our ancestors' survival, but did not dictate their worldview. In today's world, technology is central to our understanding of ourselves and the environment around us. The technological imperative stands sometimes in tension and sometimes in harmony with our religious understandings. Technology plays an undeniably greater role in our lives now than it did at any other time in human history. And one of the ways we see that role is that we now have the power to create something completely new. This is a power that was not in the ancient techne in the same way. The Greek existentialist Martin Heidegger points out that an ancient craftsman, suppose he chops down a tree and he builds a chair. You would say, well, he created something new. And that's true, but he did not impose a new form on nature. Rather, he worked with what was already inherent in the wood. Okay, in contrast, a genetically engineered bacterium changes the natural order. Humanly extracted plutonium never returns to the uranium from which it was derived. And posthumanists dream of a cybernetic future for human intelligence that escapes the limitations of the human body. So the products, or at least the dreams of modern technology, are not to simply shape nature, but transform and in some cases replace it. And as such, we have truly become what Philip Hefner coined, that we are created co-creators. So that brings me to the theology side. What does it mean to be a created co-creator? In the first 3 chapters of Genesis, and I'm going to look at the first 4 chapters, but the first 3 we find 2 creation stories. They describe the act of creation as bringing order out of chaos and making something new. And they teach a basic understanding of who we are and what is our place relative to the rest of the created order. So let's start with Genesis 1. 26 to 27 sets a pattern for humankind, and I'm sure you all know it well, but let me read it here. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the cattle, and the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Okay, now those of you who were on my dissertation committee, you can go get a cup of coffee or something for the next 2 minutes because you've heard all this. But these verses present God's intent and action in creating human beings in the divine image. The idea of in our image and according to our likeness isn't applied to anything else in the whole creation. So humans are set apart and they're given dominion over the rest of creation. So one way in which we image God is that just as God is a creator, so too are we creators. And in my mind, this precludes taking a totally negative image of technology. We are destined to be creators as well. And creation and dominion go together. In other words, it's the technologies we create that give us the power to have the dominion that these verses say we are called to exercise, that we are called in a sense to be God's deputies on earth. Biblical scholar Gerhard von Rott says that humanity is given the divine image so that they may control the whole of creation. Now for some, they'd say, whoa, wait a minute, control the whole of creation? You know, modern ecologists, many of them following Lynn White's famous paper back in the 60s, look at our dominion over nature with some pretty harsh skepticism. we haven't done particularly well. And particularly now when we look at climate change, we have to say, whoa, not the world's best stewards here. But Von Rad points out that to the writers of Genesis, it was chaos that was the great menace to creation and threat to humanity. And that as humans, we were called to join God in imposing order on nature, overcoming this chaos. And technology helps us do that. Now, while biblical scholars have been busy focusing on dominion in this Genesis text, Karl Barth focused on the very last part. Well, the first part and the last part. Let us make humankind in our image, and in the image of God, he created them. And to Barth, he says, this us, the biblical scholars have said, well, it probably reflects on some heavenly court. But he said, from my standpoint as a Christian, it reflects on God's very nature. That if God is a triune being, God is a relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the relationship between them. And so this relational nature, which exists in the triune Godhead, is what forms the ground of human creation. So instead of focusing on dominion, Barth focuses on relationship as the place where we image God. Image has a double meaning. God lives in togetherness with himself, then God lives in togetherness with men, and then men live in togetherness with one another. Excuse the sexist language, but that was written a long time ago. He talks a lot about how there's a confrontation between difference and unity in these relationships. In particular, when you look at the relationship between humans and God, God is wholly other to us, and yet we can be in relationship together. Barth focuses also on the difference between men and women and says we are called to be in relationship together, even though we are in some ways other to each other. Now, in robots and artificial intelligence, we've finally created something that could someday mimic this combination of unity and difference. This otherness, something that is wholly other from ourselves, but with which we might be able to enter into a relationship. Now, the question is, do we want that? And what kind of a relationship are we looking for? Because if we look at computers strictly as a tool, as we look at most of the rest of our technology, then we have a very one-sided relationship. But if we look at computers as a surrogate or a companion, then do we lose some of its toolness? In other words, then will it have a will of its own and no longer be the completely useful tool that we wanted it to be? Now, if we run a little bit ahead in Genesis, one of the things we learn from chapters 4 through 9 is that if we separate dominion and relationship, we can get into real trouble, okay? And we see this right off the bat in Genesis 4, which describes the age-old tension between the pastoralist and the technologically more sophisticated agriculturalist. So you have Cain and Abel. One is the farmer, one is the herder. And you have the age-old tension between them that shatters relationship between brothers. Now, an agriculture, together with new building techniques, allowed the rise of cities. And we see the rise of the move of people coming into an urban environment in the story of the Tower of Babel. And again, we find that whole groups of people can cease to understand each other. That's what's meant by this idea of they suddenly all spoke different languages. And again, it's dominion, but dominion that ends up undermining relationship. Finally, you get to Noah and the ark in these verses, and actually, that's the one technology that seems pretty darn successful. But the interesting thing with the story of Noah and the ark is this is where you find the first covenant. And Noah enters into a covenant with God. It's one that repeats that humans are in God's image and that they have dominion over the earth. So these chapters all taken together, I think, warn that using technologies for dominion without care for relationship can have some unforeseen and somewhat disastrous results. So we need to evaluate our technologies in the light of relationship. So I'm going to come back to Neil Postman here. Postman writes, new technologies alter the structure of our interests, the things we think about. They alter the character of our symbols, the things we think with, and they alter the nature of community, the arena in which thoughts develop. Now, one group that has focused particularly on this last part, that they alter the nature of community, the arena in which our thoughts develop, are the Amish. They have been particularly sensitive to introducing new technologies to their community. And they weigh the benefits of any technology with the changes that they think it will bring about to their community. Now, many people just look at the Amish and they think, oh yeah, they just stopped the clock back in the 18th century. They didn't, okay? They'll use a telephone, but they won't have a telephone in every house because then they say, we're not gonna go visit each other and discuss things face to face. They'll use refrigerated milk tanks because that's the only way they can, legally sell their milk on a broader market, but they don't want to have a refrigerator in every kitchen. They'll use solar panels to power a saw or a sewing machine, but they prefer to stay off the electric grid. Okay, with every new technology, they ask two questions. And the first is this question I think we all ask of every technology. Does it provide tangible benefits? So the Amish would say, hey, modern antibiotics, diagnostics, surgical techniques, bring them on. They've got very tangible benefit. Mowers, hay balers, generator-powered woodworking equipment, great. We can do our work better. But at the same time, they ask a second question. How does this technology affect our relationships? Technologies that might cause pride or attract attention would be unacceptable. So while surgery in general is good, no plastic surgery, okay? Anything that might be a status symbol or again, lead a person towards pride, such as a car or the newest smartphone, no, okay? In fact, they look at cars, phones, the internet, and say, how is this going to change our society? Will it weaken local ties by putting us in ties with a larger community? Now, many of us will say, but that's great. I couldn't be talking to you guys without it. But they would say, well, but let's be careful that we don't put all our energy way out there and none of it here in the local community. Then, of course, they'd also look at things like the internet and notice that it also can bring some of the less savory aspects of modern culture, stuff that's inimical to their faith and values right into the home. Now, most of us view the Amish approach to technology as extreme. But the questions the Amish ask are not unreasonable ones, because they echo the points that the biblical scholars extracted from Genesis. Does the technology exercise or help us exercise dominion in a responsible and useful way? And that answer is usually pretty obvious because that's why we developed these technologies in the first place. So we kind of know the benefits that we're reaching for. Does it heal the sick? Does it help the suffering? Does it make the environment a more sustainable, beautiful place? Does it make our lives longer and more comfortable? But the pitfalls that were described in Genesis 4 through 9, where technology plays a role in fratricide and national conflict, raises the relationship question. How will every technology affect the way we think of ourselves, the way we relate to each other, the way we relate to or think about God and nature? Are there issues of equality and social justice? Is it available to all or only some? And these questions, while easy to ask, don't always have as easy an answer as the Dominion type questions. So let's turn now to artificial intelligence. In 1962, the Stanford professor John McCarthy was the first to use the term artificial intelligence, and he established the Stanford AI laboratory with the goal of creating a thinking machine. And at almost the same time, Douglas Engelbart, who most of you, if you know of him at all, would know of him as the inventor of this thing, the mouse, okay, established a nearby augmentation research center, and he coined the term IA, or intelligence augmentation. So we have AI on one hand, and we have IA on the other. These are two very different ways to think about using computers. Okay, intelligence augmentation is much more in line with the typical idea of a tool, a technological tool. It's just, this is now going to be a tool for our brain rather than the hammer being a tool for our hand or the car being a tool that's better than our feet. Okay, whereas artificial intelligence, with McCarthy's goal of a thinking machine, goes beyond that. Goes to something that is not just a tool, but that can move into more autonomy and be able to be more of a surrogate or a partner. Okay, so our tools, when we think of them as just tools, rarely surprise us. When they wear out or we discover a better one, we discard them. And most of the time, this is exactly what we also want with our computers. When there's a better one on the market, throw away the old one, okay? We determine the tasks, we provide the programming, we just use the computer as a tool for intellectual augmentation, for its processing speed and power that goes above or faster than our brains go. And we retain responsibility for the results. But now if we go from intelligence augmentation to artificial intelligence, we get a different possibility. We get the possibility of autonomous agents. So let's take a little bit of a look at that. Agency carries the connotation of intention or independence. An agent's actions stem from a choice or volition internal to the actor. So now we have to ask a question: can a computer have an internal volition or intention? Now, our intentions arise out of our mental state. And if you ask the philosopher Daniel Dennett, who takes an instrumentalist stance on human consciousness, we could say that the internal states of the computer's processing unit are analogous to the mental states that we have, okay? But then there are others, for example, the Berkeley philosopher John Searle, who say, wait a minute, the states that are in the CPU come from the program being executed, and so they represent the intention of the programmer. And even if you look at machine learning and say, well, they weren't strictly programmed, you could say, well, yes, but the machine still is, in a sense, programmed by the rules it's given, by the data sets it's given to study. So it's still, its learning was very much controlled. Okay, so the real question we have to ask is, could a machine not just carry out its programming, but go to a meta level and make decisions about its programming, changing course from what was expected as it interacts with an environment? And I think there are many who would say machine learning is starting to push into this area. So while most machines, even those we call artificial intelligence, do exactly what we tell them to do, even when their instructions might be so complex that we can't anticipate the result, so far, they can't reason about the decisions that they make. There's still a direct causal chain between the machine's behavior and its programmers. Now, a machine with true agency would break this causal chain and be able to act independently and unpredictably to change its course. Now, could such a machine be a moral agent? Michael and Susan Anderson have 3 criteria for a machine being a moral agent. They say, well, first, it's not under the direct control of any other agent or user. Okay, second, its interaction with its environment is seemingly deliberate and calculated. It's not random. Okay, and then third, it fulfills some social role that carries with it some assumed responsibilities. Now, I think we see computers doing the first 2 all the time. It's the third one that moves back into Karl Barth's territory of relationship and says the machine fulfills a social role in which it has some assumed responsibilities. So if you think, for example, of a robot caregiver, it will carry out tasks without being under the direct control of a human being. Its choices are informed by its environment, and they seem deliberate, okay? To be a moral agent, though, its choices must be informed by an awareness of its social role, an awareness of its responsibility for its patient. So far, we do not have such a robotic helper, okay? But while we do not have machines that we can consider full moral agents, we do have machines operating with a fair amount of autonomy in settings where choices carry serious moral implications. And here I'm going to turn particularly to the battlefield. So, my heading for this section, kind of the, I think this is the last, nope, this is the second to last major section here, is, are killer robots too autonomous? So if we look at lethal autonomous weapons systems, which are they use networks of sensors and algorithms to independently identify a target and to decide without synchronous human control whether to attack or destroy it. So as such, they exhibit a high degree of agency. They make judgments and decisions that carry the potential for life or death. If the advent of flight inaugurated a new era of warfare because it meant that armies did not need to be physically present on the battlefield to unleash destruction, then lethal autonomous weapons inaugurate a third era where soldiers are not only released from a physical presence on the battlefield, they can also be released from the mental decisions of the battlefield. And here's a quotation: their capacity for self-determined action makes lethal autonomous weapons uniquely effective and uniquely unpredictable. This comes from former US Air Force Major General Robert Latif, and he says, now we're crossing a new moral Rubicon. Okay. Couple of quick examples of lethal autonomous weapons. On the big side, you have something like the Aegis Naval Air Defense System, which is used by the United States, Australia, Japan, Norway, the Republic of Korea, and Spain. It can search and guide missiles on the air, on the surface, and underwater, deciding autonomously where and when to fire. It can function fully autonomously or with a human on the loop, where operators have the ability to override a decision that it makes. At the opposite end of the spectrum, and the end of the spectrum that I find, frankly, far more scary than a big system guiding missiles like Aegis, is the Cargo 2, which is a 15-pound multi-copter that can track, it can identify via facial recognition, and it can engage targets. And, okay, that's a 15-pound thing that's about this big, but you can actually shrink all of that down to mini drones that can track, that can use facial recognition, and they can choose to engage their targets. The cargo twos can operate in swarms of up to 20, and they can either be led by a human-operated drone, or they can operate fully independently. And if you ever want something that'll keep you awake at night, go on out to YouTube and just type in slaughter bots. And it's fictional, but it's part showing something real and part showing a fictional way that these things might be deployed. Now, obviously, if we ask our first question, do these weapons give us some useful benefit, some way to exercise dominion? Yeah, sure they do. Lots of benefits, okay? They can operate at speeds and levels of precision far beyond human capabilities. They can process vast amounts of data and make rapid decisions in changing circumstances, which is very useful on the battlefield. They can operate in harsh and difficult environments. They're a lot less expensive than human troops, and they can work long hours without getting tired. They carry out orders with fewer mistakes. And of course, the big one, they can keep soldiers out of physically and psychologically dangerous and deadly environments. So lots of advantages. Now let's ask our second question. What are the costs to the human community? Because just as in the 20th century, ethicists and theologians were forced to return to just war theory and reevaluate just war in the light of nuclear weapons, and this was something that Michael Walzer in particular did, so now we must reevaluate the morality of war in light of autonomous weapons. So how do these weapons affect our decisions on when to wage war, on how to wage war, and on who is responsible for the acts of war? So you have jus ad bellum, jus in bello, and jus post bellum. You know, when to wage war, how to wage war, who is responsible, and how to hold someone responsible. And I can go into a little more detail in any of these in the question and answer session if you like. I've just finished writing an article revisiting just war theory in light of autonomous weapons. Just a few of the questions we have to ask. Would fully autonomous weapons make war too easy, too painless? Okay, here's my Star Trek call out for you, Peter. A Taste of Armageddon, actually from the old Captain Kirk series. This will of course vitiate the precept that war should always be a last resort. Would AI's lack of emotion make it less likely to commit atrocities, as the roboticist Ron Arkin says? Or would that same lack of emotion mean it has a lack of compassion and make it an implacable foe? And in the worst of scenarios, could such weapons eventually shrug off human control? And while they might not, with full volition and intelligence, turn on their human makers, they might just turn on their human makers because of some faulty programming. Okay, will this be a problem? And finally, I think the really big questions that I ask is, do these change some of the big moral areas of war, like forbidding assassination, because they sure make assassination easy? And would they make escalation easy? And would we end up, or will we end up, in a new arms race? This leads me to my final section. And here I want to turn to the physicist Enrico Fermi. At a kind of famous lunch discussion in 1951 on the possibility of there being extraterrestrial life. So now my shout out is for Ted Peters. Here's my extraterrestrial life part. Fermi asked a question that we now call Fermi's paradox. He said, if it's likely that extraterrestrial life is out there, if the probability of intelligent life is high, and intelligent life is going to develop a technologically sophisticated culture that is capable of leaving the home planet, then where is everybody? How come we haven't heard from someone anymore? By now, someone somewhere if not physically, at least with their machines, should have colonized large parts of the galaxy. Now, the futurist Nick Bostrom has looked at this question and he said, you know, it's pretty silent out there. That means that technologically advanced intelligent life must be rare, if not unique. And so he suggests somewhere there's something he calls a great filter. Now, this great filter could be early in the evolution of life. It may be that it's not easy to evolve life on a planet. Maybe ours isn't the only planet with life, although the news from just a day or two ago saying that looks like there could possibly be biological life in the clouds of Venus makes that maybe unlikely. So suppose life has evolved on multiple planets. If Bostrom's great filter isn't at the beginning of evolution, then it's probably still ahead of us. And that's not a good thing, okay? Because what that tells us is there's most likely a technological bottleneck, a point at which our technology evolves faster than we do. You know, our physical evolution, our mental evolution is fairly slow. And there are large portions of our brain that are still geared for living in a much less technologically accelerated world. And yet our technology accelerates faster and faster. So there's an old Amish adage that says we grow too soon old and too late smart. And, you know, we could just adapt that and say we grow too soon technologically powerful and too late smart. Okay? At first, technologies are remarkable at improving a species' ability to cope with the environment and to survive. The harnessing of fire, developing tools for hunting, agriculture, domestication of animals, these all allowed our species to flourish. But technology doesn't always change the environment for the better. If any of you have read Jared Diamond's Collapse, he gives a bunch of societies which use their technology to the point where their society collapsed. Species are hunted to extinction, agriculture depletes the soil, weapons help us kill each other. Evolution functions on an individual level. It selects individuals who are better adapted and have a slight advantage over their competitors and their comrades, inevitably introducing competition between species and within a species, where the fitness of one is raised or lowered by the fitness of the other. Now, the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr actually has something to say about this. He says there are pitfalls in this drive to compete that is a part of what we all have evolved to be. And that is that it's going to lead us to all the behaviors that we traditionally label as sin. While the domination of nature is part of the Genesis mandate, Niebuhr says we find ourselves unable to avoid overreaching, to avoid overestimating our capabilities. And I quote, "Man is a finite spirit, lacking identity with the whole, but yet a spirit capable in some sense of envisioning the whole, so that he easily commits the error of imagining himself to be the whole which he envisages." He's talking in particular here about our relationship to nature and saying we're all too likely to think, hey, we're it, we're the whole, it's all about us. In order to develop an advanced technology, any species would have to have evolved this capacity for envisioning the whole. However, such a capacity brings with it tremendous power, tremendous egotism, and the foreknowledge of mortality, which causes anxiety and dread, which Niebuhr sees as both the source of creativity and the temptation to sin. So this takes us back to being creators. And according to Niebuhr, he says, it's what powers us to be a creator. Those very same drives also power us to sin, to overreach, to be narcissistic. Nuclear weapons were our first doomsday technology, and autonomous AI could be another. A species with multiple ways of destroying itself or its environment must have the wisdom not to do so. So I see us as essentially in a race between the development of technology and the development of morality. If technology wins, we lose. But we haven't just developed technologies, we have developed religions. And while like our technologies, they are too often deployed in the service of competition and the vain quest for security, we could also deploy our religions in the quest for mutual cooperation and service to one another. If we hear from another intelligent species, they will have gotten through their technological bottleneck and acquired the wisdom and moral development to surpass the drives of competition fostered by evolution and to live with their technologies. Perhaps they could teach us a thing or two. If the skies remain silent, then we're on our own and we better grow up quickly. Otherwise, we'll have to accept the fact that transience might be part of not just individual life, not just part of civilizations, as Jared Diamond chronicles, not just part of species, but maybe of life itself. According to Niebuhr, I quote him again, "We seek to deny or to escape prematurely from the uncertainties of history and claim a freedom, a transcendence, and an eternal and universal perspective which isn't possible for finite creatures. The problem of sin amounts to the problem of life." That problem might be insurmountable, but God willing, we will surmount it, and we will develop and use our technological creativity not in service of just competition and dominion, but in service of relationship with wisdom and grace. Thank you. Thank you for listening. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Noreen. That was wonderful. Braden's going to monitor the Q&A section now. Thanks, Braden.
Yes. So again, if you have a question, if you go to the participant tab at the bottom and click on that, a list of everybody who's here should pop up on the right. And then there's a place that says raise hand. That's probably the easiest thing for me to find, but you can also type in the chat if you have a question, and I will try and call on people as I see them.
I put you all to sleep? Oh dear. Or did I depress you all so much with my technological bottleneck that you can't speak?
Joseph, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for speaking tonight. It was a really good talk. I totally did not fall asleep. I was very, very engaged. And so my question is about 2 points that you had made. One, you mentioned the technological bottleneck. And two, you had talked earlier in your talk about how technology is just an extension of us. And so considering where we are at this moment in history, it's not in a great place. And my question is about timing. Would it be prudent to, just set aside our technological desires for a while and maybe engage in more, moral instruction, just kind of put a pause on all of that development? Or, should we just keep doing what we're doing because the technology will happen anyway?
Joseph, that's a great question, and you're not the first person to ask it. Bill Joy, who was the chief operating officer for Sun Microsystems, way back in 2001, published a really controversial article in Wired magazine. And the title of the article, you might want to look it up. It's online. It's real easy to access. It's called Why the Future Doesn't Need Us. And in that article, he advocates for pretty much what you were just saying. He says that with robotics, nanotechnology, and genetic engineering, that these are three technologies that are getting ahead of us, or at least they're getting ahead of our moral and ethical ability to control them. And he proposes, oh good, Braden, thanks, there's the link for it. He proposes that we do exactly what you said, Joseph, and put these three technologies on hold for a while until we have figured out how we are going to control them. Now, while I think that that's a great idea, I also think there's no way on God's green earth that that's going to happen. We're not going to get everybody to agree to do that. And, you know, in particular, I would love for us to put a pause on lethal autonomous weapons and just say, you know, we don't want to go there. I don't think it's going to happen. And so what we're going to have to do is find ways to control these. Now, we have managed to do that to some extent with other weapon systems. For example, chemical weapons. We've had treaties that ban the use of chemical weapons. That does not mean they don't ever get used. You know, we saw them used in Syria. We've seen them used in other places, but they don't get used a lot. Okay, they're not being used by the major players. And so I think it could be possible for us to come up with something similar. Now, we banned the chemical weapons because we saw in World War I how awful mustard gas was, and the countries just agreed. I have a feeling we're going to have to see how awful lethal autonomous weapons can be before we're going to reach such a ban. Sadly, we grow too soon powerful and too late smart.
Stephen, please unmute and ask.
I think my question is kind of an extension of Joseph's. I live down in Mountain View, surrounded by what, Facebook, Apple, and especially Google. What powerful technologies they have. They are technologies that happened without our input in many, many ways. So my question is about religions as a kind of creator of social technologies. And obviously you're kind of touching on this. You think of families, education, community, solidarity, worship calendars, etc. And you also talked about the Amish as creating structures of control of technology. And can you elaborate a little bit more beyond what you did with respect to Joseph on what kind of new social structures that religion can help create? Spiritual conversations on Zoom, for example?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think one of the things that our religious communities have to do is educate ourselves on these technologies, on what they are, on what their powers are, on how they can be used for good and for ill. I think people need to speak up. I think people need to think about these issues as the life and death issues that they might be, along with other life and death issues. So for example, I would say to Catholics, yes, abortion is a life and death issue, but if you're a one-issue voter on only abortion, climate change is also a life and death issue. Some of these technologies, whether they're going to be proliferated, this is also a life and death issue. You know, think about multiple life and death issues, not just one. What else? I think, you know, when you talk about Mountain View, I mean, I immediately started thinking about Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. And I think we're now, only now, finding out that here was a tool that I think everybody jumped into thinking this is going to be great for relationality. This is going to be great for relationships. We're going to keep up relationships with these far-flung people. Excuse me. And we're only now seeing how badly awry such a tool can go. And that this, you know, the Facebook as a tool is, yes, it's fostering some relationships for us, but it's absolutely killing some other relationships. It's putting us into bubbles, you know, and especially Twitter is doing this, where we only hear from like-minded people. And in fact, I had a reporter call me about a week ago, and he said he wanted to hear about how religion was going to say that social media was really great. And I said, it's not. You know, I said, you know, if you look at Jesus, he's going to say, whoa, wait a minute. You know, he reveals himself to a Samaritan woman. He cures the centurion's daughter. This is not a bubble man, you know. He's not saying, I'm just here for the Jews, you know, or I'm just here for Jews who think like me. And he's there for everybody. And so in many ways, we have to critique. We have to bring what we have been taught, the wisdom of our religious traditions, to critique these technologies, and maybe a little faster than we've tended to do.
Peter, go ahead.
Noreen, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Yeah, thank you.
Hear the blue
Wonderful.
too.
I'm being bombarded by crows, very intelligent. Without getting into the weeds of Picard, which I'm just thrilled with it as an initial foray into this next generation of Star Trek. I wonder if you could address something that seems to have come up in the first 10 episodes, and that's the quest of synthetic life form Soji for personhood, for recognition of her being a person. And address that particularly in the context of the question that Picard raises in episodes 9 and 10, the moral issue, where it seems that the synthetic community is critiquing the immorality of humans and Romulans and others, but unwittingly placing themselves outside the bounds of morality. And Picard takes her to task and says, wait a minute, what you're talking about is genocide of non-synthetic life forms. Do you see this as, as a key theme, both in that series and in the question of how we move forward with AI?
Okay, I'm not really going to go into the series. If you haven't watched it, everybody watch it. But you raised 2 points. Okay, the first one is personhood. I'm currently writing a book, which I hope to have finished soon. And one of the first things that I do in that book is say that I think personhood is the wrong category. It's the wrong term for us to use when we think about AI. The reason I say that is because personhood, at least here in the United States, has become a legal term. And as a legal term, it's black and white. You either are a person or you're not a person. And this is part of what has led to so much controversy, for example, around abortion, because it's black and white. And so you get people saying, well, then at what point, is the fetus a person? Is it at conception? Is it a bit later on, as some other religious traditions would say? Is it, And the thing is, you know, we're not looking at something that's black or white, on or off. We're looking at a gradual development of a person in that whole time. So I think most people would agree that a late term, you know, right before birth, is much more of a person than just, you know, a newly fertilized egg that is a potential person, you know, but that hasn't divided yet, let's say. And so I think because it's become legal terminology and therefore you have to either be a person or not be a person, this is the wrong thing to ask. And so that's why I focus on relationality, because you can have degrees of relationship, you know. And coming back to the abortion analogy, a mother is going to have a much deeper relationship with that 9-month-old fetus than she has with that newly fertilized egg that she doesn't even know exists yet. And so relationality gives us space. It gives us gray area. And I think gray area is what we need when it also comes to talking about AI, so that we can say, yes, this particular AI is relational in this way, but maybe not in this way. Okay, for example, I can relate to it and hold a conversation, but it doesn't understand sickness and mortality the way I do, and the way another human being would, who has experienced sickness, who knows that they are mortal in the way that the AI isn't. So there are types of relationality, there are degrees of relationality, and that's what I'm examining in the book that I'm writing right now. Now, there was a second part to your question, which I've forgotten. Let me think.
Well, it was the question of morality and the AI in the series, forgetting that it itself is part of a moral system.
Right, and I think that too is all tied in to this question of relationality. In other words, morality only means anything in terms of our relationships. Now, these do not have to be just our relationships with each other. They could be our relationship to God. They could be our relationship to the rest of nature or the earth. But morality, you can't have morality all by yourself, okay? And so, yeah, morality is a relational concept.
Joy, go ahead.
Thanks very much. This is especially interesting to me because I started life as a molecular biologist when genetic engineering was new, and vividly remember the Asilomar pause to where the scientists voluntarily put a pause and put in place rules that have withstood to a point the test of time, and we're now having people break out of them because there isn't a broad consensus, and the technology, the manipulations can be done so widely. Where do you at that point there were so few people, you could actually get them in one place, and you could talk about, because they came from a similar enough culture, you could talk about how to move forward. And I think it was informed by some of the predecessors of the nuclear weapons scientists who had tried to contain the genie as well. How do we go about setting up forums in which these conversations can be held, acknowledging that we can only maybe slow down things?
Yeah. I wish I knew. You know what I mean? I wish I had an answer to that question. I would dedicate the rest of my life to making it happen, but I don't have an answer for you.
Is there a way that we can leverage centers such as this and other academic institutions where we have great technological universities in close proximity to centers of interreligious education to try to provide a critical mass to at least engage on the topic?
Yeah. Sorry about the background music. I obviously forgot to turn my phone off, so there's technology for you, horning in on this. Should quit in a second. Yeah, well, I think we have to leverage everything we can. So, you know, definitely education is important. Centers of education that are sending out, seminaries that are sending out pastors, sending out teachers. Yeah, I think we need to get them into the conversation, but we also need to get politicians in on the conversation.
Which is why I mentioned public theology. If you are
Exactly.
if you are proximate to as many industries and centers where people are actually sending people out and bringing them in, maybe there's a way of having such a forum.
Yeah, and I'm also part of a grant project right there at the GTU, which is trying to get people who are dealing with technology and religion, specifically technology and the whole concept of religion and presence, and trying to get us all to write for the popular media. And I think that's very important as well, because all too often this can become an academic conversation that we have with each other, but it's not getting out there to the broader people. So we've all, you know, signed up for this grant and made a kind of a promise that we're going to try to get our work out so it's being read by people other than other academics.
And people, and in language that
I'm sorry, Joy, I'm
educated
gonna have to
people.
cut you off. There's still a lot of people that have questions to ask. Thank you. Derek, if you could unmute and go forward. If we can keep questions concise, we still have a number of hands to go, people who haven't spoken yet.
Thank you very much, and also to Noreen. Just a really quick question. I chatted once briefly with Ron Arkin, and I think you brought up his name. He's also, you know, I think a person of faith. But in his arguments, you know, he, as a computer scientist, maybe you can comment on this too. He says that we can code ethics and morality into lethal autonomous robots. And I wonder whether there's a philosophical argument that you can provide or some kind of way of countering that. Because my sense is that ethics and morality, even if we could come up with the perfect set of ethics and morality for lethal autonomous robots, are not going to be reducible to algorithms. And of course, he in his book, he writes about an ethical governor that goes inside of lethal autonomous robots and whatnot. I'm wondering whether there's a philosophical argument against even the possibility of doing that, and what you think.
I think the best argument against the possibility of doing that was made 50 years ago by Isaac Asimov. I mean,
well, the 3 laws, yeah.
Yeah, you know, he comes up with his 3 laws, and almost every one of his stories is about how those 3 laws don't work.
Right.
And one of the things that I ask my students, I teach a course in computer ethics that's required for all of our computer science majors. And one of the things I ask them to do is, you know, to write their own story showing that the 3 laws don't work. And they do not find this to be a difficult assignment. Mm-hmm. I think it does show that, you know, if we had a perfect ethical code, my God, wouldn't we live by it? But we don't. You know, you can say, well, okay, how about the 10 Commandments? But we know that that's not the perfect ethical code. And we also know that most of us violate those commandments all over the place, and that at times that's exactly the right thing to do. Right. And so, you know, human beings have been searching for the perfect ethical code for ages, and we've never found it.
And it's the nuance and the complexity of real life and relationships that comes into it as well, right? Of course, it's a big part of it, I suppose.
The other thing I would say to I have said to Ron Arkin, because we've gotten together and debated this several times, is that, you know, even if you had such a code, would the Pentagon use it.
Hmm.
I mean, they're not building these autonomous weapons to be ethical. They're building them to win. So even if we had such a code, I don't think we would use it.
What I find interesting that he is a person of faith, and he's driven by a desire to make the world better. But I think philosophically, he needs to think a little bit more philosophically and theologically about what the presuppositions are behind what he's doing, essentially. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely he is a man of faith, and he wants any robots that he has had a hand in developing to be ethical. And he makes some good points. You know, I won't go into them here because we don't have that much time. But in general, I think, well, he's a bit simplistic on the philosophical and theological side, as you pointed out.
I would agree. Thank you so much.
Oyasuru, if you could unmute and ask your question, please.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation, Noreen, in spite of the fact that I'm not a scientist in any real sense of the word. But my question has to do with religion. And I wonder if Christianity has not become an impediment, actually, to our finding a way to continue living as persons, human and non-human, on this planet. And because of its alignment so much with the powers that be, whatever the current power seems to be, Christianity seems to start leaning toward that. And what does that, in my view, is this whole idea of being the dominant force on the planet. I just don't think, I mean, there are other, I'm wondering, in a nutshell, my question is, are we talking enough with other religious entities, other religious and cultural expressions of humanity, to be able to say statements that make it sound like we're making universal human statements when we really are talking about cultural issues that seem to be long term, but actually are not that old. I mean, there are other ways of looking at the world and its relationship, our relationship as humans to the rest of the planet, that are very much not like what's in Genesis. Yeah. And so I'm wondering, is there something we can learn, being humble? Is there something we can learn from other religious ways of being in the world, whether it's Tao or whether it's Ifa or whether it's some other religion that has been less affected by Western culture?
Mm-hmm. Oh,
in order to find some of those answers, and that goes to what's happening in the larger cosmos as well. I mean, who says that life in other places has to be like ours, even remotely?
Well, it doesn't. Although I would postulate that evolution is likely to work the same way wherever it crops up. And I don't know of any other mechanism for developing into intelligent life other than evolution. So
if I were an intelligent being on another planet, I wouldn't come near this one. I wouldn't come anywhere. I'd give them 1,000 more years to grow up. That's what I would.
They're doing that. Who knows? That's a possibility. So yeah, your first question about can we learn from other religious traditions? Yes, I think we have to. I think every religious tradition has strengths and weaknesses. And since Christianity is my tradition, it's the tradition that I am theologically speaking out of and speaking to my fellow Christians. I also teach Islam on my campus, so I'm quite familiar with that tradition as well. That was part of my wonderful GTU education, which said I had to study another spirituality. And, you know, the one thing that I think Christianity brings that other religious traditions do not bring to the table is the incarnation. And the incarnation and the Trinity, which of course is bound with the incarnation. This idea that God embodies relationship, that puts relationship right at the center, but also that God took on our human body, which says there's something special about being embodied, that to have a full and complete relationship, we need to meet each other physically. We need to be embodied, to look each other in the eye, as Karl Barth says. And I think this is something that Christianity emphasizes in a way that other traditions don't, which is not to say that other traditions denigrate the body or that they don't see
It seems
God
like
as
Christianity denigrates bodies a lot. I mean, it makes a hierarchy of spiritual versus physical in ways that Ifa would never do, for example, or the identity of non-human persons as viable. Not, what did you call it? You said with AI and artificial intelligence is, I guess, not the same as intelligent augmentation, because augmentation is more like using a tool.
Yeah.
Isn't that what you said? Well, isn't that the way we use nature? We use the rest of nature as though it were a tool instead of in relationship with us. And I see a lot of religions don't do that. Christianity does that. We've been
well, I think we're straying a little bit from the topic now, but it's a very broad and important topic, and there are a lot of environmental theologians who are addressing that. Okay. Aiden?
Thank you. Go ahead, Ted.
Thank you, Braden. My question is long and complicated, so I will yield the floor to somebody that's got a short one.
Okay, if we have time, we'll come back to you. Mitch, you're next on the list.
So I've also been thinking about the Asilomar conference, because I was, at the MIT AI lab as a student when that happened, and I saw a note that a meeting was going to happen as David Baltimore came back from that, and thought I needed to go as an AI person, and discovered half the AI lab had gone, and was really struck by the fact that, we all understood this had the potential. But my question is this. When I view autonomous weapons, I have a lot of trouble finding any point in the middle between landmines, which are really the first very effective autonomous weapons, although, a crossbow with a trigger wire works just fine, and what we're doing now, right? I mean, we keep thinking the systems may cross some line, but as far as I can tell, we're nowhere close to having anything that isn't just classifying in the way that we're building in multiple levels. And the question is the central problem for the moment that just these systems have gotten too good at it? The potential, like atomic weapons, is just too large? Or that we could actually, is it that we can eliminate cost to ourselves of warfare? Or is there something already that's different in kind about what we're doing?
Well, so far, there's nothing different in kind with our autonomous weapons, because they haven't become moral agents. Okay, so that's why I went into that whole thing about moral agency. If they were to become moral agents and be able to think about and alter their own programming, then I would say we've got a difference in kind. I mean, the landmine can only explode. It can't decide, oh, I don't want to explode, I want to jump up and fly through the air. It does what it does. So far, our autonomous weapons are not different in kind because they're not moral agents. So they just do what they do. The danger in them, I think, is that of their kind, they're more powerful. They're more powerful than the landmine is a landmine. Okay, it doesn't fly through the air. It doesn't use facial recognition to say, I'll only explode when Mitch Marcus steps on me. Okay, so that's the difference. It's not a difference of kind, it's a difference of degree, so far. It could become a difference of kind if the landmine could decide completely on its own. You know, I kind of like Mitch Marcus, so although I was supposed to explode when he steps on me, I'm gonna jump out of the air and go look for Ted Peters and hunt him down instead. Then you have a difference of kind.
Good, good. So the main problem is just that we've been on a slippery slope where now all of a sudden we're getting good at doing this and we can build things that are
We're
too
getting
powerful.
too good at doing this, exactly.
Good.
Okay, Adrian, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, Noreen. Thank you. Thank you for this. This is fascinating. And thank you for the prior questions, because you got to most of what I was actually going to ask. I do think, following on from Mitch there, that there are some really thorny fundamental philosophical questions. You mentioned that we're on the brink in your talk. Perhaps we have something new. Perhaps we're on the brink of creating something new. And you know, the core, you know, difficulty is identifying when we really have switched from something which is just an amplification, you know, from a hammer, where we can trace the actual agent, we can trace that causal chain back to the naughty human who did the nasty thing. And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how we are going to be more crisp about understanding when we have a genuine new agency in front of us. Because there are some really simple things you can do. It's possible to lose track of agency. So we, in the landmine case is a classic one, where there is no particular individual human who's responsible for that murder. But how do we then transfer that, just by lacking an ability to track who caused it? Yeah. Like with a digital computer system, you know, never conventionally programmed, we know precisely who programmed that thing and how they did it. But then you can muddy the waters really quickly by adding, you know, like a thermal random number generator to break that causal chain. So I'm curious, do you think we will, if we had to make a decision tomorrow, whether this you know, killer robot was truly capable of making up its own mind, how do we start to think about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I do think that we are far too quick to ascribe agency to our machines. We see action and we ascribe agency where real agency isn't really there. But what you raise, Adrian, is, I think, the biggest jus post bellum question, justice after the war, and that is, who is responsible? You know, as you say, who is responsible for a particular killing? If you're going to have retributive justice, if you're going to ask for restorative justice, well, first of all, you can't really punish a machine, you know, nor can you ask a machine to engage in restorative justice. You have to ask the question, is anything the machine does truly willful? You know, or was it random, as you pointed out? And so in general, you know, people say, well, we, you know, for determining responsibility, we've got to go back to maybe the commander who deployed the machine. But there you run into the problem that commander probably has no idea what the actual programming is of that machine. If you go all the way back to the programmer can say, hey, well, wait a minute, I didn't deploy it, don't blame me. And so what you end up with, I think what we have to end up with then is corporate responsibility. that in some sense, all of them are responsible for their piece of the pie. And, you know, that raises a much larger question that I've been thinking about for some time. And that is that if we go back to, you know, Niebuhr and his saying, you know, all these problems kind of come down to all the stuff that we've called sin. We've tended to look at sin as a very individual thing. You think of the 7 deadly sins, and you just see an individual who has anger, lust, pride, greed, all these things. But the worst sins that are happening in our world today are corporate. They're not individual. And it's very hard to put your finger on, you know, one person and say, okay, that's the person who is responsible. And so I think this is a task for all of you theologians out there. We need to start rethinking how we talk about sin and realizing that the old ways might not quite fit our technological world as it is today.
Okay, thank you everybody for your questions. I'm going to ask Bob to take over again for some wind-up remarks.
Great. Thanks again, Noreen. It reminds me of your wonderful question in your dissertation. Should we think of ourselves in terms of the computer, or should we think of the computer in terms of ourselves? And you played both questions off each other. That was wonderful. I wish we had time. I'd ask you to say what you think about that now, 20 years later, but that it's always stayed with me as a great way to frame this interaction or relationship that I have with my laptop and it has with me. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. This has been fabulous. I hope you enjoyed having the public forum online. I encourage you to come back on Friday, October 9th, to hear Jim Stump. Jim is the Vice President of BioLogos, and his talk will be on the spiritual journey of Homo sapien. I'm looking forward to that. Jim was here tonight. Thank you for being here, Jim, and your work at BioLogos. Let's give Noreen a round of applause and thanks.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you. Great questions. You've given me a few things to think further about as I go back to my writing. And this was really a lot of fun. So I hope you all have a lovely evening.
Good night all. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.